What do sourdough bread, The Lord of the Rings, and Lego all have in common? Let's talk about it.
It's this guy right here. His name is Parker, and he's the guy behind Basil and Bloom. He runs what he calls a micro bakery right here in Southeast Idaho, but what I really love is the educational content. When I found out that he named his sourdough starter Lord SOURon, I knew what needed to be done. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, it is time to make the most ridiculous shaving brush I have ever made. It scratches all the itches: Lord of the Rings, craftsmanship, and dad jokes. So let's make a blank by mixing up cruelty, malice, and will to dominate all life, of course. A few days later, after this had cured, I popped it out of the mold, and I realized that I too had abandoned all reason for madness. This is ridiculous.
So we have Lord SOURon here, all chucked up, ready to go. Now, the minifigure that we have in here is about the maximum I can do for a brush like this. So my design on the base is going to be fairly minimal, which means most of the design flair or theme has to be communicated in the top. This is going to be a bit of a challenge.
The first step, we're going to go ahead and drill it for the shaving knot. But first, let's take a minute to appreciate that forbidden fettuccine. The next thing we're going to do is shape the top. I wanted this to look kind of like a crown or something medieval, something straight out of Middle-earth. Now, you may have seen this shape before. However, I'm going to make a little bit of a modification, something I've never done before. We're going to do some fluting on the top. If you don't know what fluting is, don't worry, my terrible edit here will show it to you. Smooth like butter, right? Well, unfortunately, the brush is not smooth like butter right now, which means we need to sand and sand and sand and sand some more. I'll tell you what, guys, this is a tedious process, but it was about the only way that I could get that look. Remember, we had to keep the base fairly simple, so if I wanted anything to be medieval, it needed to be this top. So while I'm sanding this top, let's talk about Basil and Bloom. Now, I am never going to make a loaf of sourdough. It's just not something I'm really too interested in. However, I love learning about it. I think it's a little bit like Deadliest Catch. Remember that show? I don't think many of us actually want to go out on a crab fishing boat, but we all loved seeing that lifestyle, learning about it, something that we had no idea. I think that's what Parker has really tapped into here. You really ought to check out his channel. Beyond Lord of the Rings, I think that's something that we both share. We both enjoy educating people on niche content, me with traditional wet shaving and him with sourdough baking. That, and apparently a good dad joke every now and again. So now that we've got the front all turned, we're going to flip it around in the chuck and we're going to shape the bottom. The first thing we're going to do is cut a socket for the coin. I'm going to measure that with my Forstner bit and then I'll cut that out by hand. On this particular brush, we were very, very tight with our margins. The minifigure is a lot taller than most standard minifigures, and so there wasn't a lot of room in the base for that coin, so I had to be very, very precise with this cut. And speaking of precision, I also had to be very, very careful here not to cut too deep. I wanted to cut deep enough to give it some shape, but not too deep to get into that minifigure. It was all a game of millimeters here. And unfortunately, I'm running out of time. I'm going to have to put this in part 2. Stick around. We're going to finish this one up on the next one.